Okay, so I guess I should address this whole Obamagate thing, and I'm not going to do it from the typical angle that I think most people are going to hit it by, and that's not to say that that typical view is unimportant. And what I'm talking about is, sort of the more partisan angle. Look at this as, um, the Obama administration was spying on Republican candidates, namely Trump, because that was the main one at this point, throughout the 2016 election, to try and dig up dirt on them, to help them out in their advantage, to try and sway the election in their place, and then once they lost, trying to sabotage the incoming administration. That's an important thing to address, but I don't want to hammer on that because there's plenty of people who are doing a good job breaking that down right now, and this is a very complicated story with a lot of angles. And so what I want to address is more of the, not so much the partisan angle, but more of the establishment versus anti-establishment angle here when it comes to the intelligence community and the defense establishment, the military-industrial complex, because that to me is even more interesting. Especially when you get into the very late aspects of this, when we're talking about Flynn and the Kislyak call and all of these things, the transition period between Obama to Trump. And so just to give some background on why things, I think, unfolded the way they did and why they went after Flynn in particular, the U.S., since the end of World War II, many people are aware of this, has had what we call the bipartisan foreign policy consensus. It's enveloped by the phrase "politics ends at water's edge," meaning that no matter what party is in power and who the president is or who controls the Congress, the U.S. foreign policy will never change. Okay, there is only one foreign policy, and that is American intervention everywhere in the world, world domination, dollar supremacy, the covert overthrow of governments that don't do as we say. All of these things are accepted as givens, within the bipartisan foreign policy consensus. This is how the U.S. is supposed to operate. We are supposed to be active at all corners of the world, at all costs, getting involved in the business of every country on the planet. And obviously, since this is the consensus view, an easy way for an upstart politician to differentiate themselves is by challenging this to a certain extent, which Barack Obama certainly did in 2008. Barack Obama ran, much in the same way that even George W. Bush did, as saying that, hey, we've got all these foreign entanglements that George Washington warned us against, and, they're bogging us down. And at the time, people were very tired of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. And so Obama ran as a non-interventionist president. And this in and of itself is not dangerous as far as the swamp is concerned, because a lot of people say these things. Like I said, even George W. Bush, the neocon in chief, he said similar things in 2000 when he was running. But as long as you just keep that as being sort of campaign rhetoric, that's fine. As long as you don't mean it. As long as you're someone who's persuadable by, the established order, who does, as you're told as president, who doesn't try to actually, influence the permanent bureaucracy or the defense establishment or the intelligence community, someone who rather takes orders from them rather than giving them orders and, telling them to knock the hell off, all the terrible things that they do that hurt the U.S., you are going to be tolerated. And that's what happened to Obama. Obama was not necessarily someone who believed in his heart in in the neocon project, who believed even in even beyond the neocons, because the neocons are a sect within the foreign policy establishment. Not all big interventionists are neocons. And so Obama found different ways around of finding his niche within the establishment. So instead of leaning heavily on direct military intervention like George W. Bush did, sending in the troops and all that, Obama preferred just backing insurgent groups like Al-Qaeda. Because the U.S. establishment will work with anyone as long as they will carry out their bidding. And since Al-Qaeda was the enemy of Assad and the U.S. had Assad on their hit list, backing Al-Qaeda became okay. Enter, General Michael Flynn, who was a little too naive for his own good, in that when he was fighting the war on terror, he thought that the threat was real, and that the jihadis, the Salafists, the Sunni terrorists, they were our enemy, the enemies of America. He thought that there was a real clash of civilizations there, and that we could not coexist, and that this wasn't just a difference of interests at the time. It was that hey, these people knocked our towers down, and we need to go punish them and defeat them. So when Flynn sees that the U.S. were backing these people who we said on TV were moderate rebels but turned out to be Al Qaeda, Flynn was like, oh my gosh, we're mistakenly arming Al Qaeda. He thought it was a mistake. And he was saying how terrible this is. We can't do this. We need to let Putin and Assad mop these guys up, because Al Qaeda is our real enemy. And this, pretty much is why Flynn got booted. Flynn didn't get booted for being incompetent. There are plenty of incompetent people. General David Petraeus was incompetent. Petraeus, led a failing war effort for years and is regarded as a hero. Flynn would be regarded as a very respectable hero too if he said the right things behind the scenes. Flynn's problem was, he called out the hypocrisy without even really realizing it at the time. What he thought, was a bug in American foreign policy actually was a feature of American foreign policy. And so he was run out of government, out of the military, out of the intelligence community, and, labeled Misha Flynn, just a Russian stooge. And so fast forward to 2016, and this, young upstart, well, not young, but this upstart politician, Donald Trump, who has never been elected to anything before, is running largely, on a non-interventionist foreign policy, similar to Obama, but in 2008, but more bellicose about it. And of course, the fact that he's never been involved in politics made him somewhat of an unknown as far as the intelligence community is concerned. It's not like that they had ever dealt with him, like in Congress or something like that. He's never been, properly conditioned, and so he had a bit of that X factor. He was an unknown, which made this language that he was using very dangerous, because there was still a chance that maybe he was actually serious about it. Maybe he wasn't just saying this to get elected, and then he would do what he was told. What if he actually believed this, and once he got in, he would actually have the power to implement this and not listen to the intelligence community, and this would be very scary to folks who want to continue endless wars overseas for generations and generations, because it makes them money, or it's an easy way for them to get promotions, and it's an industry. And so enter Michael Flynn, who was appointed, who was considered, by the way, for vice president. I don't know if anybody remembers that at the time, but there were folks suggesting that Michael Flynn should be the VP in 2016. But alas, Flynn was brought in as national security advisor, i.e., sort of the leader of the incoming president's foreign policy team. Michael Flynn would be directing American foreign policy, this terrible, evil, Russian asset who dared, speak against our great allies Al Qaeda. Someone who is certainly, a far stretch from being any kind of Ron Paul or Ralph Nader type of, dove, but still someone who recognized that, the way that the game was played in Washington, who, was not right and was actually against the interests of the American people. And so this appointment, signaled that the Trump administration was indeed a real threat to the bipartisan foreign policy consensus. This is why I think the CIA specifically targeted Flynn with all this, in addition to all of the partisan aspects of this story. They wanted to get Flynn out of there, either arrested or fired, to use the words of Peter Strzok, in order to make sure that he was not directing American foreign policy, and that they could get someone in there. Because if Trump was forced to get rid of his first choice for a national security advisor, he would probably put in someone who was more of a safe pick, i.e. someone who would do exactly what any other, one of these swamp creatures would do. And that's what he did in the form of H.R. McMaster, who lasted for a while, and then he replaced him with someone even worse in the form of John Bolton, an old Bush crony. And lo and behold, here we are a few years later, and guess what? The U.S. is still in Afghanistan. We still have troops everywhere. No troops have been brought home. No wars have been ended. The genocidal war in Yemen marches on, still supported by the U.S. The one thing Trump was able to achieve in the foreign policy sphere was defunding Al Qaeda. which is I mean, that's a very, very small achievement because, of course, the U.S. shouldn't be funding Al-Qaeda to begin with. But that's the only thing, I'll give Trump credit for that. He did defund Al-Qaeda. But, as far as I'm concerned, I look at what these folks working under the Obama administration, the permanent political class, the deep state, if you want to call them that, they achieved a lot of their goals here. Sure, they didn't get rid of Trump the man, but they hollowed out, Trump the candidate and reduced his candidacy, I think, quite a bit. At least, they got rid of the part that would have excited me. And this is not something that's partisan. Of course, Flynn was a Democrat, Comey was a Republican, Obama was a Democrat, Trump was, at least in 2016 and to the present, a Republican. And so I think that he's really being punished, like I said, for stepping outside a line. And for even though that Trump now has been pretty well manipulated by the establishment folks who he has stacked inside of his administration, they still, I guess the outside is still, it is part of Trump derangement syndrome, still sees him as that outsider that he campaigned as. They still see him as some big ultra dove who wants to pull the troops out. God forbid we bring the troops home. That's the last thing that the folks on MSNBC would ever want. But sadly, now that all this is coming out about Obama and all this, I don't feel like people will really get that, what I think is the timeless message here, as far as, regarding what Obama did and why. Because it has nothing to do with Trump in particular. It could have been, if you had taken any other person and had them say what Trump was doing and make the decisions that Trump had made up until that point, they still would have done it to them too, whether they were a Democrat or not. The goal was to make it impossible for any sort of anti-establishment, presidency to come to power, which they achieved. Either they were going to get rid of Trump by force, or they were going to bring him in line, and they pretty much brought him in line. So I'm sure I'll have more to say on this whole situation as the story unfolds and we get more details and things, and maybe if there's even prosecutions of some sort, although I'd imagine that for the most part that's going to be dog and pony show type stuff. But we'll see. So if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.